Since before recorded history, the people of Britain have had first-hand experience of the strange and unusual. Spirits who haunt ancient castles, stories of werewolves and banshees roaming the countryside, and fantastic creatures like gnomes, fairies and pixies, all firmly embedded in our native folklore. This cultural experience makes us uniquely qualified to research these types of phenomena and help us find the truth of the reality that surrounds us. So sit back and relax as your hosts, Irene Allen Block and Mark Johnson, take you on a journey through this strange realm and together help us find the answers to the mysteries that lie just beyond our grasp. Welcome to Paranormal UK Radio.
Welcome to Paranormal UK Radio, the flagship show of the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I'm your host, Irene Allen Block, and with me is my co-host, Mark Johnson.
Hello.
Hello, I've been away a long time, Mark.
Yes, you have. I mean, between being so deathly sick and then with the passing of your uncle last cousin. Yeah. So, this is our first week back after 2 weeks, so want to thank everybody for hanging in there. This flu that's been going around has been hitting people on epidemic levels all across not only the U.S., but in the UK and Europe, too.
Yeah, it has. It's absolutely been terrible. You know, the hospitals have been packed. Really packed over here. In fact, they were giving out warnings on the television to people who had flu to stay away from the hospitals unless they had breathing difficulties because they just couldn't cope.
No. It's pretty bad. I mean, so many people I know are sick. You and Brian were both sick.
Yeah.
And then it doesn't help that with the weather we're getting, and we'll ask our guests later in Florida because up here in the Northeast we've had very cold weather, and now today and tomorrow we're going to be up almost to 70. Yeah. So talk about flu making weather.
70 for you is nothing. 70 for us is our summertime.
Yeah, well, you live on a cold, dreary island, so what do you expect?
Yeah, we do. The daffodils are out. Daffodils are out, Boyle.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that means spring's on its way.
Well, good. Well, actually, we wanted to bring up, before we bring on our guests, you had a very unusual experience this week.
Yeah. As many people will know, I'm half Scots. And I lost my favourite cousin in Scotland this week, or last week, should I say. And the funeral was on Wednesday. So we had to fly up to Scotland, to Glasgow International Airport for the funeral, flying up and back in one day. But something really strange happened. We left the house at 3:00 in the morning to make the hour-and-a-half journey to Bristol Airport, from where we would get the plane to Scotland. But once we came off the M4 at Bristol and started going through the countryside, making our way to the airport, we got lost. And it was 4:00, 4:30 in the morning, and there was no one around. There was no houses. We were going through country lane after country lane. The sat-nav was taking us all over the place as if it had gone absolutely berserk. And we were totally, totally lost. And all of a sudden, I spotted a man just appear by the road. So I said to my husband, stop the car, ask that man for directions. So he pulled over the car and wound down the window and said to the man, can you tell us the way to get to the airport, the Bristol Airport? We've got a plane to catch, this load and unload, all that sort of stuff. And the man said, I'd be better off to show you rather than give you instructions. And he got in the car. He literally got in the car.
Did he get in the car without you inviting him? He just said, I need to show you, and just climbed in?
Yeah. He climbed into the back seat of the car.
What was your reaction? What was your reaction to that?
I don't know. I just kind of lost. I was totally lost. I just didn't know. All I wanted to do was get to the airport because I knew if we didn't get there pretty soon, we were going to miss the plane to Scotland. And that means I would have missed my cousin's funeral. So we're going along in the car and he's giving us directions. Turn right here, turn left there, take this road here, take that road there. And I was a bit curious about him. So I asked him what he was doing out that time in the morning. And he said he liked to walk. He just liked to go every day on a 10 or 15 mile walk. He was in his late 70s, an old man. Anyway, we get to the airport. It was just a strange feeling having him in the car all the time. Like I said on Facebook, this man didn't feel human. He did not feel human at all. He had a really weird, strange feel. And I was kind of like in a different world. It was like being between this world and another world, kind of drifting all the time. I can't even remember the journey properly. Anyway, we got to the airport and he put his hand on the door to get out. And we said, thank you very much. Are you sure you'll be all right? He said, yeah, I'll get out here. And he got out and he just disappeared, totally disappeared.
Disappeared as in he walked off or he just vanished?
We never saw where he went. He just kind of disappeared. The same way as when he appeared, he just came out of nowhere. There was no houses around, nothing. Where we picked him up, there was nothing. And, of course, he just disappeared. Anyway, goes to Scotland, went to the funeral, and all day long I was disorientated. I couldn't string two words together. My husband thought that maybe it was because of lack of sleep, lack of food, or whatever, Anyway, we get back on the plane. We come back to to England again, and as soon as we touched ground in England, I was okay. But since then, it's been aggravating me, literally aggravating me. And I've been talking with my husband, and last night especially I talked with my husband, and it seems for the first time we both described what we saw. And we both saw different things.
Different things in what way?
The clothes the man was wearing. Brian says that he was wearing a black jacket with a stripe through it. I saw him in a silver grey jacket, quite thickly padded. With
no stripe?
No stripe. It was a silver grey jacket. Brian said he wore glasses. I said he didn't wear glasses. The only thing we agreed on was his hair was very thick. He had a full head of hair. But Brian said although he had a full head of hair, it was trimmed and kept, coiffure, it was tidy. I saw a man with full head of hair that looked like he'd been dragged through a bush backwards, or he'd been in a hurricane. It was all sticking up everywhere.
That is really strange that both of you saw this man completely different.
Yeah. Totally different.
So, what do you think happened?
I don't know. People have been suggesting on Facebook that he was some sort of guardian angel. I was meant to get to the funeral because it was, I was very close to my cousin. And some people say that my cousin sent him to collect me or to get me there to the airport on time. I don't know. I honestly do not know. All I do know is that this person did not. The more I think about it, there was no human feeling coming from this person.
So it was some type of being or entity.
In male form, yeah.
In male form. And how he even presented himself, you and your husband perceived him slightly different.
Yeah. Oh, and Brian said he had a little torch and a bag, a rucksack on his back. He didn't have any torch and he didn't have a rucksack on his back.
Torch being flashlight for our American listeners.
Yeah.
That's wild. That is absolutely wild. Now you hear stories of phantom hitchhikers or sometimes people coming in out of the blue, giving a message and leaving, but that is wild. I mean, and how far did you drive? How long of a drive was it when you picked him up?
Oh, God. We just kept going. It seemed like absolutely ages. I couldn't tell you exactly how long. It just kept going, and he kept saying, turn here, turn there, take this road here, take this road there. But he wasn't talkative in any other way, except the only other thing he said was the fact that he liked to walk.
So he was going to walk all the way from the airport back to where you picked him up.
Yeah. Think about it, Mark. This is a little old man, okay, in the middle of February, one of the coldest months in the year in the UK. He's out walking on the early hours of the morning. He's got no high visibility jacket, nothing that reflects lights from traffic or anything like that to let people know he's there. And he didn't even have a hat on his head to keep his head warm.
Jeez.
And he's meant to be a seasoned walker. There is no way that man was a seasoned walker.
This is one of those mysteries. Whether it's you know how I feel about the term guardian angels. I cringe at that, but it definitely sounds like
same as me. But I didn't feel he was a ghost. I didn't feel that he was dead, but I didn't feel he was human either.
Interesting. That is one we're going to have to think long and hard on. If any other details come up, we'll have to examine that.
And the fact that I was disorientated for a good 12 hours.
Something about that was very otherworldly. Maybe something interdimensional. And this type of story will fit right in with our guests tonight and what we're going to be talking about tonight. So I think that's going to be very interesting to add to the discussion. Okay. So why don't we go ahead and...
Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead. Go on.
I will.
Introduce our guest.
Thank you.
Yes.
I will introduce our guests. Right. So our guests that for tonight are co-authored the book Beyond the Bermuda Triangle. Bruce Gernon, who is a pilot, is a certified seaplane flight instructor and master captain with a Coast Guard license, along with his co-author Rob MacGregor. And Rob, we've had the pleasure of speaking to a couple of times on our show and our past show, Unknown Origins Radio, on some of his other books, like on synchronicity and aliens in the backyard. So Bruce and Rob, welcome to the program.
Thank you for inviting us.
Hi, Mark. Yeah, thank you.
You're very welcome.
So
it's nice to have you.
Now Bruce, we'll start off with you because while Rob has written a lot of other books and he co-authored this book with you on the Bermuda Triangle in general and your experiences, I think I'd like to start off with your experiences first. Now, I have seen you on several documentaries talking about your experience and what happened to you. Now, you live down in Florida, just right near where the Bermuda Triangle comes together, don't you?
Yes, I live on, you could call it like the apex, which would be in the Florida Keys, right on the edge of the Everglades, and where it meets Florida Bay, there's an area that I had a second experience that relates to the Bermuda Triangle, and other pilots have had experiences there too.
Well, take us back to the very first experience that you had with the Bermuda Triangle, and explain how you feel it was related to the phenomenon of the Bermuda Triangle.
Okay, well, and Irene, that was a really great experience you just had, and it was just recently, right?
Yeah, I hope you can throw some light on it, because I can't.
Yes. I was just thinking a lot about it while you were talking, and it kind of hit me at where I could really relate to it when you started talking about guardian angels.
Yeah.
because when I made this flight on December 4th of 1970, the timing was just incredible, and it was so fateful what happened and how I was able to escape this within just seconds of disappearing. And I can sort of relate. I had the feeling that there was a guardian angel.
I was just gonna ask you, did you have that sensation that you were not alone?
Yes, especially at one point when I finally felt that I had escaped this incredible time storm, I call it.
Yeah.
I had a really strong feeling then that there was a guardian angel, you could call it. I could hear him talking even. He was like, he was telling me that what I had just experienced, that I should always remember it.
Yeah.
Because someday it will be important for the entire world to know all about it. And that was 47 years ago. I heard that voice telling me that.
Yeah, well, it's one of those mysteries that everybody wants the answer to, isn't it? Since the day of the Mary Celeste, everybody just wants to know what this is all about.
Well, Bruce, let me ask you, what happened that first day? You were flying out towards one of the islands, or you just flying a certain route that you'd like to fly, and what happened?
Yeah, it was a certain route on a return from Andros Island in the Bahamas, and that's the largest of the Bahama Islands. It's about 160 miles off of Miami, and we were returning to Palm Beach International Airport, which was about 210 miles from Andros Island. And so it was a typical flight where I would depart Fresh Creek Airport in Andros, and that's right on the edge of the eastern edge of Andros, right by the tongue of the ocean where there's very deep water there. And we would cross the interior of Andros and climb up to 10,500 feet cruising altitude and fly direct to Bimini using our navigational instruments to home in on Bimini Island. And then we make a northerly turn and head into Palm Beach International. And the flight always took about an hour and a half to make it. And we would burn usually around 40 gallons of fuel on the round trip. And our Beechcraft Bonanza was a single-engine aircraft made in 1970. And they still make that plane today. It's a classic high-performance single-engine airplane. And we had planned on leaving in the morning, but it was raining, heavy rain over the island of Andros, and we couldn't get a weather report because they didn't even have any phones back then in 1970. And so we waited for the rain to finally let up, and we were able to depart at 3 p.m. We lifted off at exactly 3 p.m., and we climbed up to 1,000 feet and maintained that altitude because it was overcast at 1,500 and drizzling. And when we reached the western shore of Andros, we could see that the weather was clearing up. So apparently the storms were just over the mainland of Andros, and it was clear over the Great Bahama Bank, which is in between Andros Island and Bimini. And that's a shallow area of from 10 to 20 feet deep. And then the Gulf Stream is where the deep water is between Bimini and South Florida. And the first unusual thing that I noticed was there was this funny-looking cloud, but it looked like a normal cloud, like it would be called a lenticular cloud. And the odd thing was that it was only 500 feet above the ocean, sort of hovering there. And it was about a mile long and maybe 1,000 feet thick and quarter mile wide or half mile. and it was just hovering there, and it had real silky edges to it. And at the time, I didn't think that it was so unusual for this cloud to be there because it looked like a normal lenticular, but I guess I forgot that they only form it around 20,000 feet. They don't form at low altitudes. But anyway, it looked harmless, and it was directly in my flight path to Bimini. So I went ahead and I climbed up over it. And then when I got up to a few thousand feet, I was able to contact the Miami air traffic control and talk to them about what the weather was like. They said it was good between Andros and South Florida, with some large scattered storms around South Florida that I should be able to circumnavigate. And so I filed my flight plan with them and continued direct to Bimini while I was climbing up at 1,000 feet per minute. And so when I got through with them talking on the radio, I looked around me and I said, couldn't believe what I'm seeing here. That little lenticular cloud that I had flown over was right below us. And it had spread out on either side of us. And then the aircraft was engulfed by it, and we went inside the storm because it was building up. Apparently, I thought maybe it was a cumulonimbus thunderstorm that was in the birth stage, and I just happened to get above it. And it had updrafts, so I was able to climb out of it. It was like it boosted me out of the clouds, and then I'd get maybe a couple hundred feet above it, and then it would catch back up to me again. So this went on for maybe 4 or 5 more times, and the visibility inside was like a typical cloud. It was very low visibility, only maybe a few hundred feet. And I finally broke free at 11,500 feet. And so I leveled off and went to my cruising speed. We were climbing at 105 miles an hour, and then went to cruising speed at 195 miles an hour, and leveled off at 11,500 feet and looked around me. And I see something I can't believe. It's like this little lenticular cloud had spread out on either side of me for as far as I could see, which was like at least 10 miles in either direction. And it was curved now, and it was like over 20,000 feet high, and it was perfectly symmetrically looking the way the curve appeared. Yeah, so when I looked around me, the cloud had spread out at an incredible rate, and so I figured, well, it must have been a squall line instead of just a singular isolated thunderstorm. It must have turned into a huge squall. And so I tried to forget about it and proceeded direct to Bimini. So we've been flying like 20 minutes now, and after a few more minutes, like 5 minutes, I look ahead of me and I see another squall. Only now it's built up to over 40,000 feet, and again, it was perfectly symmetrically curved, like a semicircle as far as I could see. Only now the curve is in front of me instead of behind me. And so I can't fly over it. It's too high. And I thought maybe I'd fly under it. And then I noticed an unusual thing. It didn't have a base, a ceiling to it. It was just laying right on the floor of the ocean. So I couldn't really fly under it either. So I penetrated into it, and it was just full of electricity. And the visibility was better at this point. It was at least 2 miles, because I could see the ocean 2 miles high. And the deeper I got, the more intense the electricity became. So it just got way too intense. It was like flashing. There weren't any lightning bolts, just flashes. And so I made a sharp turn to the left, to the south, heading due south, and I popped back out of the storm. And then I contacted Miami radio because I had deviated from my flight path, so I wanted to let them know. And I told them I was going to fly around this apparent squall that I had encountered. So they said, fine, I'll call him back after I get around it. And at this point, I'm like 100 miles east of Miami. And I'm heading due south. And I'm flying along the edge of the storm and hoping I could maybe find an opening. But then I see that the storm that I had just departed from and escaped from was becoming visible to me now, and I could see that it was connecting to the new squall that I had just encountered. And so I realized that I was sort of trapped inside this storm, and it was like a circular shaped, donut shaped storm. And I have seen these storms a few times on radar, and I noticed that right on the opposite end of where the storm was born, and this would be about 40 miles away, the two ends of this donut-shaped storm had met on the bottom, and there was this big valley in between the two squalls. And so that was like an opening where I could fly around it, and it would take me right toward Miami, and I could see clear blue sky on the other side. So I started heading that way, and then I noticed that there were two anvil heads on each side of the squall. An anvil head formed on the top of the storm, and then the two anvil heads met together and formed a tunnel. And in our book, there's graphic illustrations that show all this. And the tunnel at first was maybe a couple thousand feet, and that's in diameter. And but it was rapidly closing in, and I hesitated to fly through it now, but I consulted with my dad, and he was my co-pilot and licensed pilot, and he agreed that we should go for it. You know, I guess we both felt it was our only way to escape this very unusual storm. And so the center of the storm was around 10,000, and so I started diving down, and then I noticed it was getting smaller and smaller, and then we went to full power so I could get through it. And it looked like it was about 10 miles long. And when I penetrated into the entrance of it, it had reduced down to maybe 300 or 400 feet. And something incredible happened when I entered into the mouth of the tunnel. These strange lines instantly formed, and they were swirling counterclockwise. And it was kind of like looking through a rifle barrel. Well, actually, people have seen this on TV where they show these tunnels with swirling lines. I've seen it many times where it's been animated. But it's like I'm the only living person that's seen these lines. And it should have taken me about 3 minutes to reach the other end, being 10 miles long, and I'm going close to 200 or 230 at this point. And it took only about 20 seconds to reach the other end. And when I reached it, it had reduced to such a small diameter that it was only about 30 feet wide, because the wingtips scraped the edges of it as I went through the exit into the clear blue sky. And when I looked behind me, I watched the tunnel collapse. And now it was rotating. It formed like a slit. It was rotating clockwise because it was going counterclockwise as I flew through it. And that's when another incredible thing happened. The clear blue sky that I had just entered instantly disappeared, and it turned into this strange gray, yellowish gray. And that's all I could see was this.
It just totally changed just like that.
Yeah, well, this is what I call electronic fog.
Yeah.
And I believe it is created in these tunnels.
Mm-hmm.
That can happen in normal circumstances in meteorology. In between squall lines or thunderstorms, they can form these tunnels. I've seen and photographed many of them.
Yeah.
And I believe that when they collapse, they can emit like a spear of this electronic fog. And what the fog does that's different than any known fog is that it attaches itself to vessels, aircraft, even can go to the ground if there's downdrafts, or it can go up higher.
Yeah.
Get the higher jets if there's updrafts. And at the same time, I felt this strange sensation that felt like zero gravity. And it was different than zero gravity, though, which I've experienced many, many times. This felt like I was hydroplaning, which I've only done a few times. And when you're hydroplaning, you feel like you're skidding forward and floating at the same time. But you're not really floating because the gravity's still with you. So I felt like I was in zero gravity and floating at the same time. And it only lasted about 10 seconds. And so now I'm about 90 miles east of Miami, and I checked my navigational instruments to make sure that is my correct position. And I noticed I couldn't seem to get a position fix, it's called, with the instruments. And so I asked my dad, because he was a better navigator than me. And so he started fumbling with the instruments, and he said, well, something's wrong. And that's when I noticed that even the wet compass, the whiskey compass it's called, was slowly rotating counterclockwise, and we were going straight. We weren't turning. And then all the electronic navigational equipment was going haywire. So I wasn't exactly sure of my position because of that, but it should be 90 miles east of Miami. So I was able to contact Miami on the radio, and I guess they could tell I was a little unsure of myself. They tried. I asked them to identify me, and they tried, but they couldn't do it on their radar. And so they weren't any help at all. I wasn't on the radar, and they said there wasn't any planes in between Miami and Andros flying at all right now. And,
so they could hear you, but they couldn't see you.
That's right. Yeah.
You disappeared.
Wow. God, this makes my story look silly.
Yeah, it's almost like I was in another dimension.
That's not all, though. Tell them what happened next, Bruce.
My gosh, Bruce, you're so brave.
We were in this fog for about 3 minutes, and my dad went into a state of panic. He grabbed the mic out of my hand and started screaming at the radar controller. But that didn't do any good. I grabbed it back from him and calmed him down. And we had a passenger with us. It was our business partner. And he lost his ability to speak words. He started mumbling to me. And he was trying to tell me something, but it didn't make any sense at all. And so I had to totally just forget about him because he was starting to distract me and concentrate on flying the airplane perfectly straight. I never made any turns at all. And I couldn't see the horizon. I couldn't see the sun. It was like 3:30 in the afternoon, or getting close to 4. And
so you're still surrounded by the fog at this time?
Yeah. So then all of a sudden these lines formed, and they were all around the airplane, and they were parallel to the direction of flight. And then the lines cracked open, and I could see blue through the fog. And see, I thought I was flying through fog, I didn't realize at the time I was flying with fog. It was attached to us. And so this is what you could call an electronic dissipation of this fog. And it took about 10 seconds for the slits to get wider and wider until they were all gone. And then I was in the clear blue sky again. And so I turned around and looked back, expecting to see this huge fog bank, and it was perfectly clear sky. So it had electronically dissipated, and then the air traffic controller comes back on the microphone, and he's all excited. He says he's got an airplane directly over Miami Beach. And I look at my watch and see I've been flying for 33 minutes, and I told him, no, I'm about 80 miles east. I got another 30 minutes of flight time before I'm going to reach Miami. And he said, are you sure? Yeah. And then my eyes started to focus because I was in this dull gray, and then I instantly went to bright blue, and then I was able to look below me, and then there it was, Miami Beach, right below us. And so that was the point right there when I realized that I had just escaped from something that's incredible and very important for scientists in the future. Mainstream science needs to find out.
And you time traveled.
Yeah, and then I went back to Palm Beach International from there, so that the flight was actually longer than the direct flight of 210 miles. It's more like 250 miles. And so when we landed, the flight time was 47 minutes. And it should have been closer to like 80 minutes or so.
And you also had too much gas too, right, Bruce?
Yeah. It was many months later. One of my physics professors suggested that I check the gas receipts because we had saved them, and sure enough, we used 10 gallons less fuel that time because we always filled up. We topped the tanks when we came back.
Yeah.
And it only took 30 gallons instead of 40. So we saved 10 gallons of fuel, which would account for the 30 minutes in time that I had got ahead of time somehow.
Wow.
Like he teleported.
Yeah.
He teleported through space and time.
Yeah, time traveled.
Yeah.
Bruce, I really admire you. I really do. I don't know how you held it together. I think I would have just totally cracked.
I was only 23 years old at the time. And
wow.
Actually, I had what you could call a flaw in my flying abilities. I had the feeling that I was invulnerable.
Yeah.
Like a macho man. So
most 23-year-olds are like that.
So, but I was not scared. A lot of people ask me, "You must have been scared," and actually, I was not scared in the least the whole time. But then I experienced it again in 1996 when I was older.
Yeah.
And I was really, really scared then, because it goes back to there are air pilots, there are bird pilots. There are no old, bold pilots.
Yeah. Well, I think it's amazing. It's an amazing story. Don't you think so, Mark?
It is. And so, Bruce, let me ask you, as an investigator, some of the things I look for in cases like this is you weren't afraid, but did you experience any type of, or did you feel anything unusual during that instance? Like these clouds seem to be moving and forming almost mechanically, or almost like there's an intelligence behind it. Did you feel anything or get any sense that there was something intelligent behind it?
Well, in hindsight, yeah. But at the time that I was making the flight, no. But in hindsight, yeah, especially the timing of it was so perfect that I was able to escape it. If I had made the wrong decision along the way, I feel like maybe I would have disappeared, like many other planes have. And so it's like I could experience this time storm from its birth and then fly through the heart of it when it became mature, and then escaped through an exit tunnel just as it was getting ready to die. And so the timing of that was incredible that I was able to do that. So that's why I've memorized every phase of it.
What I find interesting, and actually, Irene, similar to your story, is the fact that while this was happening, your passenger in the back was struggling to speak and be coherent. Irene, you were saying after the encounter with that not a hitchhiker, but the guy who showed you to the airport, the rest of the day you seemed to be out of it.
Yeah, I was out of sync, totally out of sync. I couldn't string two sentences together. I felt such a fool.
So it seems like you came into contact with some form of energy that, again, can affect the mind, affect the body, especially since it seemed to transport your plane 30 miles closer, I guess it was. So do you feel that the phenomena you experienced, and Rob, I guess you can chime in on this one, could be part of the explanation of what's happening to ships and planes in the Bermuda Triangle?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that what Bruce's experience is he has a survivor experience, but a lot of people, I think, have had this same type of experience and not survived, never been able to tell about it. There's a couple other ones that we've written about who have survived, but I think most of the stories of the mysteries, including the famous Flight
19.
Flight 19, right. They may have encountered this electronic fog as well and just become disoriented and crashed, disappeared.
Well, what's interesting is that they've never really found the wreckage of Flight 19 and vanished, and the fact that they sent a PBY out looking for them afterwards, and they also disappeared as well, with a crew of about 19 people on board. So, right. Just to refresh people who may not be familiar with, in 1945, at the end of the war, there was a training mission from out of Fort Lauderdale, where some attack craft were making practice bombing runs, and they flew out to sea, and then they were radioed back that they were lost, their navigation wasn't working, and they seemed to vanish and into thin air. And so they sent out a what they call a flying boat. PBY went out looking for them, and that too vanished. And none of them were ever seen or heard from again. Now, anyone who ever saw the classic movie of Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the opening of that movie was one of my favorite movies of all time, in showing where they had the planes showing up in the middle of the Mexico desert, was an interesting touch. But in reality, the planes were never found. And so there's all this speculation, along with, what happens to the boats that disappear. Are they sinking and they're just in spots where we haven't found them yet? Or did they go somewhere else? And
I would say that both things happen. It's like the Malaysian airliner. I believe they encountered the electronic fog, and they weren't able to escape it. And they did something similar to Flight 19. They climbed up high and couldn't get above it, and they went down low, couldn't get below it. And then they went through a series of turns, and that's what disorients you. If your navigational equipment is not functioning, you're going to lose track of north. And so they probably crashed out in the Indian Ocean somewhere, because they've found a lot of debris now. They found some parts of the airplane that float.
Yes.
And they've actually determined that when it landed, it was the autopilot that landed the airplane. It wasn't the the pilots. And they could have passed out, because there's cases where pilots have flown this, and they've gone in the electronic fog, put on the autopilot, and passed out. And then they woke up when they reached the shoreline, and they were back in the clear again and back to normal. With the Flight 19, the strange part about that is they never found anything at all. And these guys were all trained in how to ditch their airplanes, and they all wore life vests while they were flying, and they all knew how to inflate the life rafts that each one of them had, and nothing floating whatsoever has ever been found of Flight 19.
Except for one thing. This is a strange story that most people don't know about, even people who have followed this case, is that in 1991, there was 5 TBM Avengers were discovered in a line off the coast of Fort Lauderdale, and the man who found them was in a small vessel called Deep Sea. Then he was a treasure hunter, and and a deep sea explorer, and he discovered them, and so he thought, this is the famous Flight 19. Here they are, and so they went back with divers, and they were the same kind of planes from the same era, but they were not the same planes. The serial numbers were different, so it wasn't them. And so it was totally baffling mystery that nobody knows how those 5 planes got there. Usually there is some, if they were pushed off of a ship, it would have been something in a logbook or something, but nobody knows how those planes were ditched and what happened. So that just adds to the mystery of the mystery.
It sure does.
Well, unless it's something, and not trying to put on my tinfoil hat here, but unless it is some type of conspiracy where maybe the military dumped some other planes in an area to try to, like, quote, solve the mystery and get people off of it. Because let's face it, if there's a location with this type of strong energy, has the ability for time transport and whatnot, you would think the military would be very interested in that. Look at the tales of the Eldridge.
Don't you think they would have made sure that every detail was right, that the serial numbers were on these planes?
Well,
even if they were fake planes?
I'm just throwing it out there as a possibility. Not saying that that's what happened.
Different government, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, sweetie.
But with all the other types of disappearances that have happened, going back for centuries, and the weird ones for me is the ones where the boats are found, they're in perfect condition and nobody's there, and where did the people go?
Yeah, those are the really strange mysteries where sometimes there's food even on the table, and it's like they just vanished right in the midst of a meal or something. It's there's several of those stories. They're unusual.
So, and now, Bruce, you said you had another experience in 1991. Was there anything different about that experience compared to this one in 1970?
Well, yeah, it was the electronic fog only. There was no time storm associated with it, and it took place on the edge of the Everglades, right where it meets Florida Bay. And I used to live on an airport there, which overlooked that area on the bay, and I had taken off in the morning, and my neighbor had taken off in his airplane just before me, Carl Burton, and so I was climbing out of the airport, and he's coming back. And he got on the radio, and another neighbor contacted him. He was on the ground with a handheld radio, and he said to him, "Carl, why are you coming back? I thought you were flying at IFR to Tampa." And Carl said, man, as soon as I got over the Everglades, there was fog everywhere, he said. Everywhere I could see there was fog. So I just turned around, I'm coming back. And I could tell there's something wrong with him because he used to talk too much on the radio. He was a character. You can't talk too much on the radio, actually. And he wasn't talking enough. He didn't want to talk. In case I even talked to him, I said, Carl, what are you talking about? Fog. Yeah. So some kind of fog or something. I'm coming back home. He didn't want to talk anymore. So I wasn't sure what to do. So I just kept going. I was flying north to Palm Beach. And as soon as I got over the Everglades, instantly it became foggy. And there was fog all underneath the aircraft. And I go, whoa, now I see what Carl was talking about. And I didn't want to go back because I had business plans to do in Palm Beach. And so I contacted the Miami Flight Service, the Weather Bureau, and asked them, how extensive is this fog? Does it reach all the way to Palm Beach? And the meteorologist says to me, fog? He says, what fog are you talking about? There's no fog reported anywhere in Florida. I said, well, what am I looking at here? There's all kinds of fog here over the Everglades. He had no idea. So now I'm getting nervous, because I had just, when I took off from the Keys, there was a big thunderstorm that just was hitting the airport right when I departed. And so it wouldn't be good to go back to the Keys. And then if I couldn't make it to Palm Beach in the fog, and I didn't have a heck of a lot of fuel that day. So my wife was with me, so she was getting nervous too. And so when I look below the airplane, I see something strange. There's a hole in the clouds, in the fog, right below the airplane. And the hole was like perfectly round. And it was, maybe 35 feet in diameter. And the unusual thing was that, well, I could see the Everglades through the hole. That was only about 1,500 feet high. And I see the Everglades moving the same speed as me. I'm going like 180, and there's the Everglades zipping through the hole underneath. And I'm thinking, this has got to be some kind of a strange meteorological condition, because at the time, my theory of how the electronic fog attaches itself to the aircraft was unknown. And you see, that's what was happening there. I didn't realize it. But I kept studying it because I'd never seen anything like that before. And as far as I could see, there was fog everywhere, but it was all below the airplane. And this is the electronic fog is what it was. And it had attached to the bottom of the airplane. And it was of a lesser intensity. In my book, I explain these intensities, and if there's any pilots listen, they should pay attention to this, because they may encounter this electronic fog someday. And if they do, they need to make some decisions. And the first decision is to don't make a whole bunch of turns, because you may end up getting confused. But it depends on the intensity. There's 5 different intensities that I've labeled, and so that the fog that I was in at this point would be like an intensity level of 2. It wasn't affecting the instruments.
And Bruce, you could see a hole in the fog beneath you, right?
Right. So that's when I just had a feeling that maybe if I turned from inland over the Everglades and headed out over the ocean, maybe I could get away from this. And it was similar to my first experience, where the fog dissipated when I reached the mainland. Well, now this is just the opposite, and this is what I tell pilots: if they're over a mainland, to aim for the ocean, the nearest body of the ocean, or if you're over the ocean and it attaches to you, to aim for the nearest body of land. And so I made the turn toward the ocean, and then within a minute, the hole starts getting wider. And I started to get relieved then, because then it got real wide, and it appeared to be like a mile wide, but that's an illusion. See, you can get illusions when you're in this fog too, because if you're thinking that you're flying through fog, and you're going to see some strange things happening because you're not flying through it, you're flying with it. So this hole flying with me, below me, starts getting wider and wider, and it's perfectly round. And then as I reached the ocean, the hole became so wide that it was gone, but there was this strange ring around the airplane. And when you look through the ring, there would be a kink in the land or the ocean, whatever you were looking at. They didn't meet. There would be like a gap. And again, this was similar to being inside the time tunnel, I call it.
Yeah.
Time tunnel effects. I believe I was seeing the fabric of time when I flew through that tunnel. And I believe I was seeing the fabric of time when I saw this ring around the airplane. And I thought the ring was maybe a mile or 2 miles away from me, or 3. I couldn't figure it out. But in reality, it was maybe only 200 or 300 feet away from the airplane. And it formed like an illusion. And so I returned to Palm Beach, and even when I came in on final, I was just a few feet above the ground, and I could still see the ring. And then as soon as the wheels touched down, it disappeared. And
gosh.
Did you experience any other anomalies in time or distance like you did before?
On that flight, no. Although I believe I was looking at the fabric of time, it could have been maybe a few seconds in this difference in time that I experienced. So I didn't really notice any time dilation.
So your advice to other pilots is to keep going straight, don't keep doing any turns,
right?
Just keep level-headed, yeah?
Yeah, hopefully they can. It depends how it affects them. But there's been many pilots that I don't want to say they become so scared. It's called spatial disorientation. This fog can induce this into your mind because your instruments are telling you that you're turning and you're going straight.
Yeah. And
then if you start making turns, things get even more confusing. And so something happens to the mind. I've never experienced it, but it must be kind of like you feel dizzy and you can't really control the airplane anymore. That's why it would be wise to put on the autopilot if you're starting to feel like that.
Now, Bruce, you had mentioned something towards the beginning of the program about hearing a voice or presence, guardian angel type during one of these events. Was it during one of these events, or was that something different?
No, that was after I escaped through the time tunnel and electronic fog, and then it electronically dissipated right over Miami Beach, and then I realized I was safe again.
This was on your first experience, yes?
Yeah. Don't usually talk much about that because it's sort of a paranormal thing, but like I was telling, it was almost like a guardian angel was telling me something.
Yeah, we have one story in our book that is about an experience where the fog seems to be sentient. The fog seems to have intelligence. Would you like to hear about that story?
That was one of the questions that I had lined up to ask you, actually.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay. This let me put this in a little perspective first. The first book that Bruce and I wrote was 2005. That was The Fog, largely about his experience and some other people who had experiences in the Bermuda Triangle. Then over several years, Bruce had received emails weekly, monthly, and they piled up. And so we got together, and he has this huge stack of emails, and he says, maybe we have another book here. And he hands them to me. So I go through all these emails, and I'm looking at them, and I tell Bruce, these are interesting stories, but you know what? most of these do not take place in the Bermuda Triangle, but they're interesting experiences with time travel, with fog. And so, we talked about it a while and said, well, maybe our next book is called Beyond the Bermuda Triangle, which is the book that we wrote. These experiences happen specifically in the Bermuda Triangle, yes, but they also happen elsewhere, and over land, on land, people in cars, people walking. So it's not exclusive to the Bermuda Triangle, but the Bermuda Triangle has the reputation. That's why we hear about it.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you whether there was any events that happened other places in the world, right, like the Bermuda Triangle. But obviously, like you say, the Bermuda Triangle is the most famous one. But
right, exactly. They happen elsewhere as well. This particular story happened near the Bermuda Triangle in Miami, a neighborhood or part of the city called Coral Gables. And there's a golf course. There's the Biltmore Hotel is a famous old hotel in Coral Gables, and there's a golf course there. So this story took place in 2007. Hector Nunez was the man who contacted Bruce, and then I contacted him, and we had several different conversations about this strange experience. He and a friend who he hadn't seen for a while got together, and they decided they would just go get together and go for a walk on the golf course, just to have a chance to chat and see how things were going in their lives. So they parked. They went in the parking lot, and they started walking along the 9th hole of the course, and they were just lost in conversation about things from the past and how their lives were going, when suddenly they both stopped at the same time. Hector says, I felt this eerie sensation of a large hand slipping inside my head, just behind my face, and pressing against my brain. And at the same time, the back of my head felt like it was burning. And he had never felt anything like that in his life. But before he could say anything or do anything, his friend said that he didn't want to go any further because he saw sparks inside of his eyes. And Hector realized that they had both stopped walking and talking at the same time, but they felt distinct, different sensations, and both felt they shouldn't go any further. And that was when Hector noticed this dense wall of fog that was about 40 feet wide, 15 feet high, and it was about 300 feet away from them, between two trees. And Hector lived in Florida most of his life, and he knows when the atmosphere is ripe for forming fog. And this wasn't an evening where fog would normally appear, so it was odd. But then the fog began to move toward them. The wall of fog rolled up and down these small hills on the course, and it was snaking its way right towards them. And they hadn't even gotten over the shock of this high, strange experience when this fog is coming at them. And they both began to walk backwards as they watched it. And the fog was about 100 feet from them when it suddenly stopped and then retreated back to the trees where they'd first seen it. And so Hector and his friend Danny tried to make sense of it and tried to think of any kind of scientific explanation for the movement of the fog like that, coming forward and back. And they were just really puzzled about it. And then the fog came out of the trees again, moving toward them, following the same path over the low hills. And they began to walk backwards again, watching it. This time faster, though, and they're keeping their gaze focused on the fog, and it came closer than before, and it seemed to be deliberate, and it seemed to be coming right for them. And Hector noted that the fog could have gone in any direction, spread out and dissipated, but there was no dissipation at all. It was just a single form of perfectly defined walls on all sides. And he said, we seemed to move too fast for it, and it again began to creep slowly back to the way it came. So they decided at that point, to just listen to the sounds of nature. And they noticed that there were no animal sounds, no insects, no birds sounds. It was just perfectly quiet, and no crickets. There was no wind, and just silence. And they looked at each other baffled and decided it was time to leave. So at that moment, out of the silence, they suddenly heard this high-pitched screech that tore through the night. It was coming from about 300 yards to the south, the direction they were facing. And Hector said the sound seemed to have kind of an electronic tinge to it, as if it was a mix of biological and electronic sounds that kind of merged together. So then abruptly it stopped. But after a few seconds, another screech came from the east, this one closer, then another and another, until there was almost no breaks between the screeches, and each one of them was closer than the last. 300 yards to the south became 150 yards to the east, 75 yards, 50, 20 yards. And then the screech came right underneath their feet in the very grass in front of them. And so they were trying to, looking down, they moved the grass kicked the grass with their shoes, and were trying to figure out what could be the source of it. And they couldn't find nothing. And then they looked up, and there's the wall of fog. It's coming right at them, faster this time. And it was only about 4 feet away, and they felt like that fog had tricked them, that it was intelligent. And before they could move, the fog just engulfed them. And Hector said it felt as if a wall of electricity had struck them. And he said, like, the hairs on his face and arms were just standing up like they're charged. And the fog was dense, and it felt like it was surreal. And it felt like a 1,000 eyes were watching them. That's how Hector sizing them up, and it swirled around them. And that's when Denny just screamed. He said he was blinded. The lights were flashing in his eyes again, and like before, but now he couldn't see anything. So at that point, Hector grabs his arm and tries to lead him away to get out of this fog. And he said aloud, "We are here with only peace and love in our hearts. We mean no harm. Let us be on our way." And so he's actually talking to the fog. And they walked a ways further, and they got to the main path, and then the fog seemed to release them. And they looked back and saw it retreating back in the direction that had come and had released them. So they went immediately down to the parking lot, down to their car. And they just sat and baffled and relieved and baffled, sitting in the car, trying to figure out what had happened to them. And then Danny looks up and points, and he says, "Here it comes again." And it was coming right down into the parking lot. And Hector started that car and tore out of there, and that was it. He said he's never had any aftermath from that, physical experience at all, but it was the strangest experience in his life. Just totally baffling. And he pointed out that we weren't on drugs, we weren't drinking, we were perfectly straight when all this happened.
And it shifted out of that car park like a rocket, I bet you.
Yeah, right.
Oh my God. Do you know something? At this time of the year, quite often I'll get up early in the morning to see to the dogs. And I live in the Gwandareth Valley in Wales, right? And you can see the mist and the fog rolling through the valley, coming closer and closer to the house. I'm going to be looking at it with different eyes this time. I tell you, I'm going to lock all the windows and doors instead of standing there watching the beauty of it. Oh, my gosh. Oh, dear. That's some story. Then again, the experience that Bruce has had as well, it's just absolutely amazing. I grew up with the story of the Mary Celeste floating around out there with nobody on it. But I never ever thought I'd be talking with somebody that actually experienced or went through this, Bruce.
Yes, and the fog, you could probably compare it to the power of it to lightning.
Yeah.
It's a meteorological condition like lightning. But look what lightning has done for us. Look what we did with lightning. And we turned it into power and electricity. So this fog is something similar that can be turned into a tremendous power. But the difference would be that it has to do with time. And I believe that aliens have learned how to control this power, because I did have an experience just a month after I went through that tunnel with what appeared to be a flying saucer.
You did?
That was going to be one of my next questions, is if you had experienced any sort of UFOs or unidentified craft in the triangle.
Yes, well, this was a close encounter. This was my closest encounter. I've seen many UFOs, and 8 of them have been close encounters, but this one was within a few hundred feet. And what happened was, it was like a month after I had experienced this time tunnel experience, and it was a perfectly clear night, and I was with a girlfriend, and I said, why don't we go flying? She had never been in a little plane before, and so she agreed, and so we took off, and then again, this was like fate again. We take off from Palm Beach International, and I fly right over Miami and Miami Beach, and I'm not even thinking about what I had experienced, escaping the electronic fog right over Miami Beach at 10,000 feet, and here I am at 10,000 feet. Wasn't even thinking about that. I was at the same altitude, and instead of heading to the west, I'm heading east, going offshore of Miami Beach. And so we get out over the ocean, and we get about 5 miles out. We're admiring all the stars, and it was kind of like a black abyss, though you really couldn't see the ocean. And then we look out, way out in front of us, and there's this strange orange light, and it's kind of bobbing up and down and making strange motions back and forth. It's kind of looked like a candlelight off in the distance. And I pointed it out to her, and she saw it. Yeah, we both saw it. So we kept watching it. And then all of a sudden, it just aims right toward us at an incredible speed. It must have been way out there, probably near Bimini, 50 miles out. And within a matter of seconds, maybe 10 seconds or less, it took up the whole windshield of the airplane. It was only a few hundred feet in front of us. Wow. And it was maybe 300 feet almost in diameter, and maybe 50, 60 feet thick. And it had another dome on top of it, a saucer shape with a dome on top. And it appeared to be metallic. And I thought we were going to die when it got that close. So I made an immediate turn to the left as hard as I could, thinking I was probably going to die at the same time I'm making the turn. And then we were okay. And then we looked back, expecting to see this thing, and then it was gone. And so we both, I never forgot about it. I haven't seen her, but she probably never forgot about it either. But it was on the identical flight path that I was on when I went through the tunnel, when it was aiming toward us.
What I find really interesting with the tunnels that you've witnessed and other people have seen and experienced is, in more recent years, we seem to be leaning towards this theory of traveling through space and time, rather than like the Star Trek, coming up with a faster than light warp drive or something. Instead, it's more along the lines of folding space. The movie Interstellar approached that subject, and a few other movies and shows have talked about it, where if you're taking 2 points in a straight line, they're so far apart, but if you on a flat piece of paper, but if you bend that paper, put a hole through it, it's like that shortcut. These tunnels almost seem to act like a type of Einstein-Rosen bridge or a wormhole, where you can travel, craft can travel from one distance place to another in a very condensed time frame, because you're literally traveling through time and space. Many UFO witnesses and experiencers have witnessed these types of portals or wormholes opening. There's Colm Kelleher's book about the Skinwalker Ranch, Hunt for the Skinwalker, where they talk about these portals opening up in the sky above the ranch and craft flying out of them. And it could be dusk, almost dark, yet when the portal opens up, you could see bright sunlight and blue sky through the portal as these craft fly through. Are they flying in from somewhere else around the world, through time, from another planet or dimension? It opens a real big can of possibilities. And I'm wondering if the Bermuda Triangle is one of these spots, or a natural power spot around the world that fosters this types of activity. Now, you also mentioned, when I was looking at the book, there is something in Asia over near Japan called the Dragon Triangle, something similar.
Right. There's been, Charles Berlitz wrote a lot about the Devil's Triangle, and very similar experiences there happening for over centuries, actually. So that's one of the places where they also happen. But it's difficult to find anything new or recent since Berlitz's book on that. I keep looking and searching for new stories from the Devil's Triangle, and I can't really come across any, which is interesting.
Well, it even seems like the Bermuda Triangle doesn't have the amount of stories in modern day that they have going back in time to the 40s, 50s, even in the 70s when Bruce had his first experience.
Right.
Because we have so many aircraft and ships. It was multiplied, 1,000-fold to go through these areas all the time and have no experiences.
Exactly. Right. So that's the thing about the electronic fog, or this experience, that it doesn't happen in any particular time of the year, any particular place, but when it does happen, there's just anomalous conditions that take place. There's a physicist at the University of Nebraska, David Perrys, who has gotten very interested in Bruce's story, and he feels that Bruce entered a warp bubble that was created by these two electromagnetic storms, and that what happened to him is that is like space compressed in front of him and expanded behind him. So the plane was flying about 200 miles an hour, but to traverse that space of 90 to 100 miles so quickly that it did, it would have to go like 2,000 miles an hour, and the plane would have just exploded and disappeared. So unless you could have this explanation of the warp bubble, which is the mode of transportation of in science fiction, it hasn't been actually. It doesn't really exist as we know it, although he is actually working on creating a craft that could move in such a warp bubble across the space and time. He's making it in his garage, actually.
We have a whole chapter on him.
Yeah, it's a fascinating.
Let me guess, he's using a Tesla. I was going to say, let me guess, he's using a Tesla. I'm making fun of Elon Musk with them launching the Tesla into space. Well, he's got it in his garage.
Yeah.
See, his theory is slightly different than my original theory about part of the experience of flying through that time tunnel. I always thought that when I came out of the tunnel, I was about 90 miles east of Miami, and then I got caught in this electronic fog, and it took me 3 minutes to reach Miami. So somehow I traveled that 90 miles in 3 minutes, which would be around 2,000 miles an hour.
No, he was saying really, I think he says, Bruce, that you traveled at 90 miles instantly, and you ended up about 10 miles outside of Miami Beach. And then that 3 minutes you're talking about was when you were flying in a normal fashion for the last 10 miles until you came out over Miami Beach. I think that's the way he looks at it.
Yeah, that's the way he theorizes it. That as I went through the tunnel, and when I came out of it, I didn't come out 90 miles from Miami. I came out 10 miles offshore of Miami. So somehow I traveled a distance of 80 miles in an instant, like over 300,000 miles an hour to do it.
Yeah, which would be impossible under normal circumstances.
Well, Bruce, let me ask you an odd question, because people who usually have these types of experiences, in my experience, especially when you felt like there was a presence after the first one telling you to remember this, it's important. Have you dealt with any other types of really strange or even paranormal types of events in your life, either prior to or after these events?
Well, yes, I have. Rob would probably be as familiar with them as me. I don't usually talk about them a whole lot. But,
the reason I'm asking, it's because it seems like what most people think of as one-off events, there is a pattern to them. Whether it's the people involved, there's something with those people that tend to have more than one experience. And I'll use a couple of famous names. I mean, there's, Travis Walton from, they made the movie about his experience, Fire in the Sky. He was with the loggers in Arizona. They came across the UFO. He was zapped. They thought he was dead. So they left, and he was aboard the UFO for 5 days before he was returned. Now, he tells that story, and that's the main thing he tells on the circuit, but it turns out people like him, they also have more experiences. Betty and Barney Hill, their famous abduction case, well, it turns out that they were having experiences almost all their lives before they passed away. And not just on the UFO front, I'm talking about just on the strange or high strangeness front.
I think Bruce has had a number of those experiences, especially with precognition. You could tell him that story, Bruce, when you first found out about the Bermuda Triangle. Keep in mind, when Bruce had this experience in 1971, there was no such thing as the Bermuda Triangle per se at the time, because nobody knew about it, because the book, the Bermuda Triangle by Charles Berlitz, didn't come out till either 74 or 75, but these experiences were happening, and it just didn't have a name. And so when Bruce saw I can't remember who was on the television show that you saw.
Dr. Valentine.
Dr. Valentine, right? You had this. One of those. You had this experience that you saw yourself with him in a particular restaurant. Could you tell that story, Bruce?
That was the first famous scientist I worked with on this experience that I had. And he was the curator of the Museum of Science in Miami. And I saw him on television being interviewed on the local news. Him and another well-known aviator in Miami. They were both like explorers, and they did a lot of research in the Bahamas. And he was telling them about some strange things in the Bahamas. And he had I don't know if he wrote that book with Charles Berlitz then. I guess he did, yeah. Well, no, I think not quite. But
yeah, he provided a lot of the research for Berlitz.
He sure did, yeah. He really helped him. He played a major role in the book. And so I contacted him, and we had a conversation and on the telephone, and I told him what I experienced. So he said to me that, well, first of all, while we were talking, I'm getting like the vision that I can see him and me and our two wives at a restaurant. It looked like somewhere in Miami, overlooking the city skyline at night with the high rises and all. And then while I'm talking to him, we're getting ready to end the conversation, and he says, I'd like to take you out to dinner. And then it's kind of like I could tell, oh, wow. I already saw what he's asking me to do. And so then it was a few days later, and I met with him. And he was an incredible person with 3 doctor degrees from Yale, and he had like psychic abilities also. And so when I met with him and told him the story, he started closing his eyes as I told the story, and then he puts his head down, and I thought, oh man, he might be having a heart attack or something. His wife whispered to me, no, he's fine. He's concentrating. So she said, keep telling the story. So I did. And then after about half an hour explaining all the details and all, he slowly wakes up. And he says, well, this is incredible. He says, you are the only person who has seen this time tunnel vortex from its birth stage and flown through the heart of it and escaped through the vortex. And so after that, we went out to dinner, and that's where I saw the vision. He took me to a restaurant on Key Biscayne, which overlooks the Miami skyline at night, and there it was. And the 4 of us had dinner together. So that was one of the visions that Rob was talking about. And then the other similar vision was with Dr. Arthur C. Clarke. I was driving in the Keys, and when I went over this bridge, and as I was coming down the bridge, I had this feeling kind of like on a merry-go-round. It's kind of like the zero gravity and the hydroplaning almost when you're going down the bridge. And then I started to get a vision, so I was able to really control this one. So I hurried home. It was only a few minutes away, and I pulled in my garage, and so then I started concentrating, and there came the vision. And I could see it really clear. It was almost like my eyes were open, and it was almost like watching a movie screen. And I wasn't sleeping; I was wide awake. And on the movie screen, I'm watching a TV show, and the show is of me flying my airplane through the Bermuda Triangle, and the interviewer is this old guy with balding white hair, and tall, glasses, distinguished looking, but I didn't recognize him. He looked a little like Dr. Valentine, but it wasn't Dr. Valentine. And so I didn't forget that. And then 2 years later, they called me from England, and then he said, Dr. Arthur C. Clarke would like to have you on his TV series, The Mysterious Universe. And I said to him, oh, I've been waiting for you to call me. I knew you were going to call. And then we did the TV show. I had already viewed it before we did it.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that was a great series as well. I used to enjoy that.
Yeah.
So it's in the future. I've had some other visions where I've seen the future.
Yeah, but I think Bruce's most interesting one, though, is related to UFOs. Tell him that story. That's the most fascinating one that I find. When you first saw the UFO on the commercial flight and what happened after that.
Oh yeah, that was like the day after I had that experience where I almost ran into the UFO offshore of Miami.
Oh, I didn't realize it was that close in timing to that.
And it was like I had a strong feeling that I was going to see the UFOs again. This is the 5 of them, right? You're talking about, Rob?
Right. Yeah. In Delray Beach.
It was 2 strange feelings. First, I had a feeling on the way back from the Carolinas and flying over the Florida coast on a commercial airline, and we actually photographed. I was ready to photograph the UFO. It was that same saucer-shaped one that's orange at night. And so I still have the photographs of it. So then there's like the next day or so, I get a strong feeling again that I'm going to see UFO again. So we go to the beach offshore of Delray Beach. And I brought my binoculars with me this time. They were zoom binoculars. And sure as heck, we're only there for about 5-10 minutes. And then here comes the UFO offshore going from north to south, like almost like it was aiming for Bimini. And it's traveling really fast, maybe 600, 1,000 miles an hour. I don't know, but it's the same shape as the other one. And then when it gets out of sight to the right, which is to the south, I look back to the north, to the left, and here comes another one. And they were like total of 5 of them. And I zoomed in on one of them, and it, sure as heck, it was the same shape as the one I encountered earlier up close. And then on the very last one, makes a 90-degree turn right toward us. And the turn had no radius to it. It had no curve. It was a square turn. And that has something to do with time also. They can make a turn without any curve to it, because when they're flying with time, it doesn't affect them physically like that. So they can turn something incredible that we don't understand. And so then it's like about 2,000 feet up, and it flies right over our head. And then when it gets over our head, it starts blinking some lights, like a blue and a green and a white, and then it disappears out over the Everglades, and it's gone. So that was interesting.
Wow. Well,
do you know something? I've seen what I think is UFOs when I've been flying. Last year, I don't know whether you remember this, Mark, or not, but when I was on my way out to Italy, and we were flying above the clouds, and it's like nice soft cotton wool, all bouncy, white clouds for as far as you can see. There was these objects, silver objects, way off in the distance, kind of above the clouds, but they were doing all these weird turns and circles and things like that.
You never told me that story.
Oh, didn't I?
No.
Oh. Well, I'll tell you everything else. But anyway, they were way off in the distance, and I could see them doing all these intricate blasted turns and going around in circles and things. And I just didn't take any notice of them. I knew they were UFOs, but to me it was natural, and I just didn't take no notice. I just looked at and watched them for a little while and then carried on doing whatever I was doing inside the cabin.
Like watching a flock of birds.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen something similar to that. Can I give you my latest thoughts on UFOs?
Yeah, go on.
It's to do with the time tunnel experience that I had. You remember when I told you about the strange lenticular cloud that I first encountered?
Yeah.
It seemed to be the birth of the storm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it could be possible that inside that cloud was a mothership.
Oh.
And it would be the cigar-shaped one that many people have seen. I've never seen one.
Oh, I've got a photograph.
I've heard.
Yeah, carry on.
Some theorists say they've seen them inside these lenticular-shaped clouds.
Yeah.
So it's possible that I just happened to be flying right over this mothership when it was getting ready to depart planet Earth and go to another star system, and it creates like this time storm when it does that, and it's like I got caught up in similar to wake tip vortices you can encounter from the jumbo jet. It's turbulence. I got caught up in the mothership, and I was lucky to escape it. So that's a possibility that I've been thinking. And this cigar-shaped that vessel, we could call it, is huge. It's close to a mile long. And the thing that Rob's good friend Joe McMonagle,
the remote viewer.
He came
Joe, yeah.
He has visions that some of these UFOs are alive. The ship itself is
biological.
Some sort of biological creation, or that is a natural phenomenon that is capable of flying throughout the galaxies. And somehow the aliens have learned to cooperate with it. It's almost like going back in time when we learned how to control horses for transportation. And so they're working with this strange cigar-shaped UFO, which when I first started researching this back in the early 70s, I read a book by a scientist from South America, and he had photos that he took with a telescope, and it showed the cigar-shaped ship, and it had like dimpled skin. And I think back to looking at those photographs he took of it, and it's like, why would the skin be dimpled like that? And it's like, it's because it's alive. It's some strange phenomenon that's universal. And he had some close-ups where there were like halls, square hallway on the side of the ship, and the saucer-shaped UFOs were flying in and out of the hallway to enter the ship.
I've heard this before about these ships being alive.
Yeah, Joe McMonagle has actually practically touched them. And I think he say, Rob, he did touch him, but they won't let him inside.
Well, with his mind, he wasn't physically touching it, but he was penetrating. Yeah. And they were blocking him, he said.
Mm. Well, I understand what he's talking about there, because I'm also a remote viewer. But
we have another story of a sheriff in Indiana, retired sheriff, who had an experience that seemed to relate to fog and a UFO experience, where and this took place on land in Indiana. So far from the Bermuda Triangle. He was taking his elderly father home from the doctor's office. It was just around 1 o'clock in the afternoon when he saw this strange-looking cloud, and it seemed to rise directly from the ground like a vertical wall. And as they drove towards it, this huge silvery sphere, like ball lightning or a craft. He didn't really describe exactly what it was. It was about 40 feet in diameter, crossed right in front of them, and they immediately started feeling nauseous, and he pulled over the side of the road. And as they watched this sphere, it moved towards that wall of fog, and a tunnel opened about 100 feet in diameter, and this sphere disappeared right into it. And at that point, Don Piltz is the name of the former sheriff, and his father became disoriented, and they looked at they were just confused, and they looked at the time, and suddenly they found out it was almost 5 o'clock, and they just left at 1 o'clock. So they lost more than 3 hours of time through this experience. So that's another unusual one.
That's a classic in missing time.
After I discovered that. And he contacted me. So I told him, why don't you see if you can go to the government radar centers and get the radar images of what you experience at the same place and time. So he was able to do that, and it took him about a year. And he was like the head sheriff of one of the counties there. And I've got the video that he sent me, and what it does, it shows 5 donut-shaped storms all forming at the same time, and they're spread out about 20 miles apart, and each one is about 40 miles in diameter, and they form instantly. So it's almost like the storm that I flew through at the birth stage. That somehow that storm instantly spread out into the form of a circle. It ignited, and that's what these things did. They just instantly ignited, and then they only lasted about 20 minutes or so, and then they're all gone. And that's what this storm was that I flew through. It was similar to that. And I was on Japanese TV with him. They were interested in that, and he was working on a book, but then he died. He passed away.
Oh.
Yeah.
So he didn't get to write the book?
Yeah.
Oh, shame.
Yeah, I think if I could tell one more story before we finish up, this is one of the most fascinating stories in Beyond the Bermuda Triangle.
Yeah, it's going to be on TV too, Rob. I was just talking to the producers at Ancient Aliens.
Oh, are they going to? They're going to talk with them, meet with them?
They already talked with them, and
yeah.
It's looking like they're going to produce a TV show about this experience that Rob's about to tell you. This is incredible.
Oh, that's lovely news. Very good news.
Yeah, this involves time travel, romance, and past lives. So all of that coming together. It took place in 1964, and the man's name is John Murphy, and he was stationed aboard a U.S. Coast Guard cutter, that was docked at Penos Wharf near St. George, Bermuda, and it was Thanksgiving Day. And so John went ashore in the afternoon with 3 of his buddies after they had a Thanksgiving dinner, and the 4 guys just happened to meet. This is very coincidental, a synchronicity. 4 student nurses in the U.S. Navy Corps. Who were there for the weekend. And so they invited the nurses to come aboard, and they gave them a tour of the Coast Guard cutter. And then after that, they went back on shore, and they kind of had divided up into pairs by then. And John had met, he was with a particular woman who he was really attracted to her, and he just felt that she was familiar to him, almost as if he knew her. And she felt the same about him, that she felt very comfortable with him. So she didn't have any problem with going off on their own. And they walked down towards St. Catherine Fort, which is an old fort on Bermuda. And so they walked down by the beach and watched the sunset for a while. And then as the sun was setting, they turned back, and they saw this trail, this path leading up a hill, so they decided to follow it. So they're walking, it's just kind of dusk now, and they're walking up this hill along this trail, and John suddenly has this impression of what's on the other side of the hill. And she seems to play along with it as if she sees it too. And he says, it's an old British village there. And there's a plaza with a church, and she says, yeah, and the church has a clock on it, and the clock is stopped. It's at 12:30, and they kind of laugh and get to the top of the hill and look down, and sure enough, there's this little village, and in the village there's a plaza with a church. So they go down the hill into the village, and they look. And the clock is stopped at 12:30, and this just blows their mind that they had seen this, and they had no idea any knowledge about this village at all. They're not from there, and they had never been there before. And so they tried the doors of the church, and they rattled the doors, and they were locked. But the odd thing is they didn't see any people. They saw lantern lights in the houses, the wood frame houses, and they were walking around, but no people. And then they come to a cemetery, and they sit down on the wall of the cemetery, and the cemetery is divided in half with another wall between two sections of it, and they both seem to know why that was. That one side was for whites and the other side was for blacks, and they just seem to know that. And so Barbara, which is the name of the young woman, she had a blanket with her because she had been at the beach with her friends earlier, and so she spread it out. And they sat down on the blanket, and they laid down. And John is feeling kind of amorous now, and he reaches over and they hug, and he wants to kiss her, and he's leaning towards her, and their lips are about to meet when suddenly it's like he's spinning in circles and falling down a tunnel, and that's the last thing he remembers. And she has the same experience, and the next thing they know, They wake up and 2 hours have passed, and they're looking around, and the village is, everything looks the same in the village, and they're just kind of baffled. So they get up and they head back into the main town and to the hotel. He takes her to the hotel, and it's kind of awkward experience. But he gets her address, and they exchange addresses, and he says he'll write her, and so he goes back to the ship. And then the next morning she leaves and she's gone. But John is still there. He's there for 10 days. So like 2 or 3 days later, he gets a chance to go ashore again, a shore leave. And he wants to go back to that village and look around again. And because he wants to write her a letter, go back on that, sit on that wall by the cemetery and write a letter to her. So he heads down there, follows the path up the hill, and look down. There's no village. It's just an open field. And he looks at, is this the right place? And he searches around, exactly same space, same place, but no village. So he's totally baffled. He goes back into town and goes to a bar and gets a shot of whiskey, and says to the bartender, was there ever a little village off in this direction between here and the fort? And the bartender looks at him a little oddly and says, yeah, a little village of St. Catherine used to be there, but it was totally destroyed in the Great Hurricane of 1780, and was never rebuilt. And so John is just totally baffled by this, and he's starting to leave to go back to the ship, and he gets to the door, and the bartender calls to him, hey, if you want to know more about that village, there's an old sea captain who lives here who's sort of the island historian, and his ancestors used to live in that village, and he could tell you about it. So he gives him the directions to the old sea captain's house. But he said, wait a minute, he's in England now. He won't be back for about 6 weeks. And so John leaves, and he actually goes and finds the house, and a neighbor says, yeah, the captain is in England. So he goes back to his ship, and but he knows he's going to be back to Bermuda. And so it's in April, the ship returns, the cutter returns to the same port, and he gets a chance to go to shore. And so the first event happened on Thanksgiving. This is several months later in April. And now the captain is back. And he goes and finds the captain, and he introduces himself and says he wants to ask him about this village. And the captain is it's kind of awkward at first. He says the captain doesn't understand why he wants to talk about that village, and but then he says he's a sailor himself, and the captain's a little more friendly towards him, and then he says that he had an experience where he was in that village with a young woman, and the captain kind of looks oddly at him, and he says, "Well, let me show you something." And he opens this chest and takes out this portrait. It shows two people in the portrait, a man and a woman, and he says, "This is my great grandmother and great grandfather. They lived in the village and they died in the hurricane that destroyed the village." And John looks at that the portraits, and the woman looks exactly like Barbara, identical, like they're twins. And he's just baffled. And the captain says, "Well, you look a little like the man that he was a hero. He was knighted by the King George, and she was a very she came from nobility, and he was stationed here, and they were living here." And he said John didn't think that he looked too much like the man, but then the captain says, "This is Sir John, and this is Barbara." The same names. Now John is really baffled. It's John and Barbara, just like he's John, and the girl he met is Barbara. And the captain tells the story. What happened is she was pregnant. Barbara was pregnant when the hurricane struck, 9 months pregnant, and they found her body on that hillside the next morning, and she was dead, but a midwife cut her open and saved the baby. The baby was still alive, and that was the great-grandfather of the captain, and that's why the captain exists today, or to that day, and because he was the only surviving descendant of that village, and so that was his story. So anyhow, to continue with the story, John never told Barbara about that he went back and didn't find the village, but he was corresponding with her back and forth. And now, after this experience with the captain, he was ready to tell her that. He didn't want to tell her before because he thought she might think he was kind of crazy. But now he had the story with the captain, and so he's about to write her. But then he gets a letter from her, and it's a Dear John letter to John, literally a Dear John letter, because she says she tells him not to write him anymore, that she's getting married, and that it was nice meeting him, but that's it. So he lost touch with her, and then. That was it. But then years later, John is watching a Bermuda Triangle story on, I think it was the History Channel, and he saw Bruce telling his story. So he decided to write Bruce and tell him about his story. And meanwhile, he started searching for Barbara, because now with the internet, things are, people are easier to find, but it still took him a few months of tracking her down because of a different name, and but he finally finds her wedding notice in a small paper in Wisconsin, even though she was from Minnesota. That's where they were married, and he finds that, and then one thing leads to another, and he finally gets her telephone number, and he calls her and leaves a message, and several hours go by, and he doesn't know if she's ever going to call him back, or if she even remembers. But several hours went by, and then she called. And he says, "Do you remember me? Do you remember this being on Bermuda in this village we went to?" And she says, "Sure. I remember we were sitting on that wall by the cemetery, and it was a very memorable experience for me." And then he tells her there's no village, and so she finally found out from him the full story years later. And so they've been in touch since. I think that was like 7-8 years ago when he finally found her. And now she's very interested in Buddhism. And at the time when she was 19 at the time, she had no interest in past lives or anything, and didn't even know about them. But now the story makes total sense to her, and so that the story just comes back together. And so in my research, I contacted her as well to verify the story, and she verified pretty much what John had told me. And now these videographers for Ancient Aliens are going to bring their story to television. So it's a cool story.
Oh, crumbs. Yeah, I say. What a story.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. And I believe it has something to do with time, too. It's hurricane. There's some...
Early time slips.
Yeah.
Yeah. Slip through that hurricane.
The hurricane. They went 237 years back in time.
Yeah,
wow.
I'd say. Wow.
That's fantastic. Mm-hmm. Well, we are actually coming up on the end of the show. So very quickly, let's tell people where they can get the book Beyond the Bermuda Triangle. Where can people find that book?
Probably the easiest place is going right on Amazon or BarnesandNoble.com to order it. Some Barnes & Noble bookstores have it, but others don't. But you can always order it. And our earlier book, The Fog, went out of print, but now we have it out as a digital book again, and it has a new name. It's called Bermuda Triangle Legacy. It has a new cover, and it's a little bit different. It's been edited some too. So those are the two books: Bermuda Triangle Legacy and Beyond the Bermuda Triangle. Both are available.
And
through Amazon.
And Bruce, you also have your website. What's the address?
Oh, we've lost him.
Did we lose him?
Bruce?
Yeah, we lost him. So the address is 1 minute. I've got it here.
I think it's electronicfog.com.
Yes, I think that's it. Yes,
that's it.
That's it. Right. And mine is robmacgregor.buzz.
.buzz. And, just to point it out to people, Rob, you've written many, many great books on the paranormal and ufology, and people should really check those out. Available on Amazon, and both book form and Kindle that you've written with your wife, Tricia.
Right, yeah. Several books on synchronicity we've written, and Aliens in the Backyard is another good one. Yeah. Plus, Trish and I both have a history of writing novels too. We're novelists as well as nonfiction writers. I wrote 6 original Indiana Jones novels, plus the Last Crusade, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
Yes, you were you were licensed by Lucasfilm to do that.
Right. Yeah. Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well.
That's great.
Yeah.
That is good. That's good. I've found someone famous.
Well, Rob, I know you've got to go, and we're out of time. So I just want to thank you for being on the show tonight. It was wonderful talking with you and Bruce.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, we lost Bruce at the end, so could you say thank you to him for us?
I will. I'll be seeing him.
And just want to thank everybody for listening to another episode of Paranormal UK Radio here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Until next week, we'll catch you then.
And we can be found everywhere.
Yes, everywhere. Okay.
Everywhere.
All right.
Okay.
Irene, have a great night.
And you.
Okay.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye now.
Bye-bye.